love the way you went quiet. So it's a fantastic start. Thank you. I guess it's working. So first of all, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here in this great house. It's not a cafe, but it's a good place to have closeness and to talk. So this Science Café from Transform for Europe is held within the Lisbon Summer School for the study of culture. And what is Transform for Europe? So after the speech of Emmanuel Macron in the Sorbonne in 2017, they started the European Universities Initiative. Sorry, I need glasses, I'm getting old. Since then, the goal is to have 60 of these university alliances in Europe. The aim is to have transnational alliances between higher education institutions across Europe, and is to pave the way for universities without borders, really. So there's a lot of more mobility between staff, between students across these universities. And of course, the goal is also to involve course recognition across these universities, so mobility is a fact. So by developing these long-term structural and strategic and sustainable cooperation between the higher education institutions, this initiative aims to improve the international competitiveness of European universities. Across the pond, the competition is severe, and obviously we have other strong universities across the globe that Europe needs to deal with. And also to promote European values and identity with this effort. So T4EU is bringing together 10 European universities, which join forces to educate people responsible for their environments, equipped with state-of-the-art technology or knowledge, which enables them to face the most important civilizational challenges of the day. Besides addressing the core goals of the European University Alliances, T4EU also focuses on challenges such as climate change, global digitalization, societal challenges such as migration, borders, societal aging, and processes that require immediate action based on expert knowledge. So the goal of T4EU is to educate new generations with highly skilled European knowledge entrepreneurs. So not just technology entrepreneurs, knowledge entrepreneurs. So these are the partners that we have in the Alliance, obviously from Saarland University, the coordinator of this project. And then I need to remove my glasses. The University of Alicante from Spain, and the universities from Estonia, Slovenia, France, Poland, Bulgaria, Italy, and Lithuania, and of course an associate partner from the University of Mariupol. So without further ado, we move into the Science Café. So which is a Science Café? For those who don't know, the idea is to have a discussion about science in a more informal way. So that's why we're sitting here. It's not a cafe. I would like to have some cafes, maybe a cigarette for the smokers, but hey. The other days, the old days, no. But anyway, the idea is to have an informal moment where we engage with society, meaning the experts with you. So please engage, please talk to us, please give us your opinion, express your opinions, ask questions. That's the purpose. So for this, we bring to you two experts. Christiane Solte-Gresser, I hope the accent is okay, full professor from Saarland University, a partner in this T4EU. She holds a share of general and comparative literature. There in Saarland, she's been the spokeswoman, for the research training group, European Dream Cultures. I believe you are talking about this tomorrow, yes? No?
Oh,
no?
yeah.
Yeah. With 45 PhD students and 10 postdocs, which has been running for 10 years now. She is the chair of the German Society for General and Comparative Literature and a member of the board of director of Logos, the International Graduate School of the Université de la Grande Région, which encompasses universities from Germany, France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. She has held visiting and substitute professorships at the Université Aix-Marseille and Goethe University in Frankfurt. So since April, she co-directs the Käte Hamburger Centre of Cultural Practices of Reparation, CURE, with Marcus Messling, which is funded by the Federal Ministry of Education and Research. She has published 18 books and about 100 articles in the fields of French, German, and Italian literature, Holocaust studies, cultures of the everyday life, cultural dream studies, inter-art studies, and political and social functions of culture. We have also our beloved record of UCP, which besides being director is a full professor in cultural studies and holds a PhD in German language and culture from UCP. She has been a guest professor in institutions in Germany, United Kingdom, Ireland, Italy, Brazil, and the US. She's an honorary fellow at the School of Advanced Studies at the University of London. From 2005-12, she has been the Dean of the Faculty of Human Sciences of UCP. And in the Research Centre for Communication and Culture at UCP, she leads the Culture, Art and Conflict group, which focuses on the role played by arts in the double work of conflict as creation and disruption. She's the founder of the Lisbon Consortium Network, and leads the International Doctoral Degree Program in Cultural Studies. She's also president of the International Federation of Catholic Universities and member of the board of the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils, and is a non-executive member of the board of trustees of Fundação Gulbenkian. She's a passionate advocate of international education and has worked consistently to develop international research networks, exploring the different ways in which the practice of the arts and humanities is pivotal to a more sustainable and intellectually robust global education agenda. So, welcome to both of you. It's a pleasure to host you here as well. So we'll have a first talk by Christiane, just to introduce her work and thoughts about the thematic of this cafe.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for your kind introduction, and thanks a lot to all the organizers for having me here. I'm really happy to share my reflections on reparation with you, and I'm truly looking forward to your questions and to our discussions. Well, obviously the question and the problem of reparation is a very complex one and a very burning actuality, and it's a contested one. So perhaps first of all, let's have a look at which levels war causes damage and at which level war should be or can be repaired. All of you know that there are different forms of war damage. The political one as a loss of democracy or emerging dictatorship, for example. Economic damage is, of course, war is more expensive than a country normally can afford. There is ecological damage that is hard to quantify, and there is a lot of cultural damage because we heard this morning that sometimes the general and actual aim of wars is the destruction of an entire culture, as monuments, libraries, archives, artworks, and so on. Well, these all are collective, more or less collective damages, but there are obviously also individual ones like physical and psychological, mental damage. And often this is damage that extends several generations as transgenerational traumata, for example. So the big question is how this can be repaired, and can this be repaired? Of course, there are a lot of attempts of repairing war at different levels, as the International Criminal Court, for example, as the example of the Versailles Treaty shows after the First World War. There is the most common way of compensating war damage by financial means, and this more widespread idea of reparation and technical reparation, for example, cleaning up environment, and medical reparation that is just needed to save lives. But you can't quantify a human life, what a human life is worth, what is the value. There is damage that you can't repair, as genocide, as colonial violence, as slavery shows. And all this damage is damage that David Scott calls irreparable evil. And I would say that this is the point where culture comes into play. And of course, culture cannot repair all these problems, but culture is a way, at least I am convinced, to deal with the irreparable. I can't go into detail here, but just to show two examples, two different approaches from a cultural, philosophical perspective. There is, for example, a famous book by Cynthia Fleury about resentment that sometimes leads into war. And just to keep it short, we can say that in her eyes, there is no reparation. Reparation means it is an illusion. It's the illusion of an individual that thinks that it can step back into history, into his or her own history, and to start all over again, and to eliminate the injuries or the hurt or the trauma. And she said, she's a philosopher, but she's also a psychoanalyst with a lot of practice in different hospitals in Paris, for example. And she says, well, we have to go through, we can't start all over again. We have to deal with the trauma, we have to cure it, we have to take the responsibility for our own feelings, and we have to create something new. We have to open the field for the future. And this is not so far away from what Suleiman Bashir Diagne says. He's a philosopher from New York, Columbia University. And first of all, he says what reparation is not. And he said reparation is not compensation. Compensation is the idea to deal with something that the injured object or subject is the same as before. And he says after reparation, nothing is as it was before. We have to deal with irreparable evil, and irreparable, that means that it can only be repaired or dealt with through culture. And he says that through culture we can start something new, we can create a future. Of course, this is very simplified. It's a complex philosophy approach, but just to keep it short. And perhaps all this sounds a little bit abstract and theoretical, so I decided to present an example about the Congo, about a war that is perhaps one of the world's most forgotten wars. And it is a war with more than 6 million dead. There are even scholars, they say that it is more than 10 million deaths, difficult to quantify. It's a war that lasts for 30 years, and 30 years, that means from the beginning of the Rwanda genocide from 1994. But of course, the history of the Congo, the violent history, the bloody history is much older than this, because we all know that it has been one of the most violent colonial rule. It was colony, in a Belgian colony, and it was even the private property of King Leopold II. And so that means that we, the global North or the Western, is very deeply implicated to all this, and it's all a question not only but also a question about raw material. It's a question about mineral sources. As you all know, the Congo is one of the richest countries in the world with respect to all these mineral resources: gold, coltan, cobalt, copper, diamonds, and so on. We all have them probably in our mobile phones, in our car batteries, and so on. And this is the reason why they are so cheap. They are so cheap because in the Congolese people earn almost nothing. So the Congo is considered as one of a failed state where there is almost no infrastructure, corruption in a very large scale, and complete impunity to some crimes. So if there are several generations of severely traumatized people, how can we deal with this, and how can the Congolese deal with this? I would like to present you 5 examples, but very, very briefly. I could talk about this for a very long time, but I'll try really to keep it short. To show you in which broad sense I mean the notion of culture, if I talk about culture. Perhaps you know a Nobel Peace Prize winner, Denis Mukwege. He received the prize in 2018, and he is a doctor, he is a gynecologist, and he founded a hospital called the Panzi Hospital in South Kivu, and he operated thousands, even some say 10,000s, of raped women. And of course, this was necessary just to save their lives, the operation in a very material and also medical way. But then he said it isn't enough. We have to go further. We have to try some legal and political reparation. So he talked with the government, and he wanted to make the government recognize mass rape as a war crime, as a crime against humanity. And then he said, he still tries it, but then he said it isn't enough, we have to do social reparation. And social reparation means that he goes into the villages, he talks with the families, with the husband, and he explained you can't reject your wife, it's not her guilt for having been raped, violated, and even you have to accept the children, the newborn children. And then he said, perhaps this still isn't enough. We have to go one step further, and there the culture comes into play. He funded the City of Joy. The City of Joy is not a structure, but almost a whole village where the women can go after their stay in hospital, and then they are taught to, for example, among a lot of other things, is trauma therapy, for example, but they learn to tell their own stories of their own experiences. They are staging their own experiences. It's like theater plays. They are drawing their injured bodies. For example, they dance, they sing together. There's a very famous Netflix film on all this. The most, I would say, the craziest example of cultural reparation in Congo is the Congo Tribunal. It's an artwork, it's a film, it's a theater play, it's also a social media campaign, it's also a book about it, the Congo Tribunal. What he tries, Milo Rau, as a theater director and a philosopher from Switzerland, what he tries to do is to bring together all parties, all representatives of the Congo Wars. There are, for example, representatives of the government, of the police, the local police, directors of mining companies, a lot of different victims, representatives from NGOs, from the International Criminal Court, and they play and they don't play at the same time. It's a fiction, but it's also very realistic because they stage their own situation. And this has some really impressive effects because other victims come and tell their own stories. The governor of the province of Kivu had to resign, for example, and the Congo wars are more known than they were before. For example, this is one of the effects. Of course, there is also reparation in the field of the fine arts. Geraldine Tourbe-Motomande is a very young female artist from Kinshasa. She is severely traumatized because she was condemned as a witch by the Catholic Church in Congo. She had to endure hard rituals of exorcism, for example. And then she made, this is what she declares, a practice, a social or a cultural practice of reparation out of this. She uses oil lamps from her family, from her ancestors, and with the smoke of the oil lamps, she creates new figures. As you see, there are figures with masks, for example, and what she tries is to repair her own history and to reconnect with the broken tradition with the ancestors. So this is what she declares, that she wants to recreate a new, to connect with the broken tradition. Of course, I could talk a lot about literature. I will keep this very short and skip, for example, the most famous Corneille Jean Bofane from Congo. But Annie Loulou, I want to talk about this. 2 sentences only because she's one of the very few female authors in Congo. And she is writing a novel, a prize-winning novel about her own history. And it's the protagonist is a pregnant woman. And the whole novel is made up of letters to her unborn baby. And she writes these letters to repair her own history, a history of racism, of discrimination, but also of political violence, because the father and other family members were involved in the independence war of the Congo, and they were killed. Last example, perhaps you know this is the most famous example. It's a Netflix mini TV series, and it's predominantly it's about Rwanda. It's about the genocide in Rwanda, but you can't separate it from Eastern Congo because, well, there's a lot to say about the connections between Eastern Congo and Rwanda, and so the whole plot is also located in Eastern Congo. And what I find very interesting is that the protagonist is a survivor of the Rwanda genocide, and she tries to survive. She tries to find strategies to survive, and she also tries to find strategies for her whole country. And it is very difficult sometimes to make the difference between perpetrators and victims, as this series shows. And I find this is a very important topic in all this reparation discussion. And just to conclude, it is interesting to recognize that this series is very deeply connected to the Holocaust, and it makes some references to the Holocaust itself, as there are similar strategies for surviving, for example, and for trauma therapy, and it's cited, it's quoted at the beginning and at the end of the series. Perhaps I should stop here to open the floor to Isabel.
Thank you so much for the intervention. So next we will also have a short intervention by Isabel, and I'll open presentation quickly. So thank you.
Okay, so some brief comments on Europe, and I will focus my intervention here on memory practices, memory policies, and also the psychology of reparation. And we started today hearing from Antonio Monegal on the relationship between culture and war. And there were a number of many important things that we learned. One of them is that if war is a cultural construct, it can be controlled. Secondly, that it can be controlled by education and cultural means, but that this process is a long-term process, and it is a long-term, low-intensity process. Even when we look at the history of warfare, warfare practices dating back 2,000 years, beheadings, impaling, gruesome. Death is always death in battle and war, but the practices used by Alexander the Great's armies, or let's say by the Portuguese army in Goa, the Viceroy Alfonso de Albuquerque, the sources from those days, the Portuguese were fierce because they beheaded the prisoners and then launched their heads onto the enemies, practices that created an absolute terror on the enemies, right? So when we look back at those warfare practices, we understand that although we continue to wage violent war, destruction, that the evolution of warfare speaks about a transformation in civilizational codes and also in a transformation, or let's say, of a more intense control of this biological drive to violence. Having said that, any transformation is always low intensity. One of the things we've learned is that, and Christiane has also said that right now, we cannot be naive and think that culture can immediately atone. It's not a cause effect. We are going to educate a generation, and that means that we will overcome war in the next one. So it's a long-term, low-intensity process. That also, but that also means that we have to keep on doing the work that we do as educators, as scholars, as researchers. And as such, I would like to start by looking at something that is not very much used nowadays in the field of culture, but that for those of us who come from literature, let's look at philology and what the etymon of the words means. What does repair etymologically mean? Well, it brings together two concepts, basically, when if we consider the English usage of the term, from the Latin reparare, which means to mend, and restore, an earlier state of affairs, going back. But there is another usage to the term of repair that goes back to a different etymon, repatriare, which in Latin languages, and also it exists in English, repatriation, going back to one's country. But the two concepts, there is a certain use of repair in the English language that means, articulates the return to one's original space. So restoration, a psychological restoration, or a return to a movement of return to an earlier state of affairs. This is precisely where Freud starts when he discusses what repair is in two works that I will refer, Totem and Taboo and Beyond the Pleasure Principle. So repair entails return. A return to which entails, again, a repetition. As you know, in the process of working through trauma, Freud speaks of two stages, which are the act of accepting and then repeating and working through. And this return to the site of trauma. becomes what he calls an obsession with repetition, Wiederholungszwang, right? You want to go back to that state, and you need to go back to that state in order to be able to rationalize and move on. But this movement for Freud articulates a danger. Namely, it says it's a contradictory device because it reflects an urge inherent in organic life to restore an earlier state of things, but it is also a device that overrides what he calls the pleasure principle, that is, the pleasure in novelty. So if you go back, it's contradictory. You need to go back in order to accept that traumatic moment and move on, but when you go back, then you have a problem with accepting the novelty of the present. And we have to be aware of this contradiction. And that is then again connected with the process which he refers in Totem and Taboo of mending the ills, Wiedergutmachung, right? When we think about with this framework, let's think about Europe. And an event in our well, for some of us, it's a recent past. For the young generation, it's not a recent past. The Second World War. When I was born, the Second World War had ended 20-odd years earlier. Right? Now it seems a lifetime ago. We are not done with the wounds of the Second World War. That war is still with us. In the low intensity mechanisms that make us reflect back on our position as a European community of memory, in the way we create frameworks to understand other conflicts, and Christiane has just spoken about how even in popular memory and in popular culture, that it continues to be a framework that is used. And let us go back to this moment and the mandate: never repeat, never forget. There is a contradiction. Never repeat, yes, but we've learned from Freud that in order not to forget, you have to continuously go back and repeat, at least intellectually, accept it at least intellectually. Winston Churchill, in 1946, gave an important speech in Zurich where he argued, we have, yes, never repeat, never forget, but in order for Europe to move forward, we need what he called a blessed act of oblivion. This notion, if we look back to ancient Greece, at the end of the Peloponnesian War, Athens issued an edict that forbade the memory of what he called evil deeds. Peace required communities to be able to move forward whilst forgetting. The grounding framework that structures the modern state order, the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, that ended the 30 Years' War. And the 30 Years' War, let us be reminded, in a population, if you think about the Holy Roman Empire, France and Sweden, which were the main combatants in this feud, had roughly 50 million, there were 50 million strong population. 8 million people died in the 30 Years' War. It was one of the most ravaging conflicts of Europe that we have forgotten. And one of the formulas of the Peace of Westphalia is precisely perpetuo oblivio et amnestia. In order to have amnesty, we need to forget the violence of this war, to move forward. Amnesty laws in many countries, precisely the notion of amnesty, of mnemonic amnesty, derives from a need to let go of that utter radical moment of violence. Otherwise, resentment, that, as Marc Ferraud argues, is the strongest accelerator of history. Resentment will continue to move, to structure the way societies operate. The European Union was built out of although the mandate, never repeat the genocide, never repeat, but never forget, but politically it was built out of an idea of we need to forget somehow, in order for France and Germany and Poland and Russia. And Russia was different, but I'm speaking about culture of European culture of nations. In order to move forward, one needs to forget. Now, that forgetfulness is problematic, of course, because what you forget, you repress. And that is why, to this moment, we still haven't done away with the wounds of the Second World War. It was politically important to forget, but that political importance, which grounds the idea of Europe as a community of memory, for instance, made it clear that, and there's a very interesting article by Tony Judd on this, on the divided memory of Europe. It says, well, it created a very simplistic narrative whereby, let's say, the ills of the Holocaust were simply based on, and many wouldn't even call the Nazi actions, but German actions, which allowed other countries which had strong anti-Semitic traditions to not deal with this anti-Semitism. The story is sophisticated, complex, violent, and each country needs to own its own contribution. It was in 2007 that Portugal, that was a neutral country, as you know, but also had its participation in the European genocide because it catered tungsten to the German forces. It also provided logistical services to the Allied, but that the first conference on Portugal and the Holocaust took place precisely at the Gulbenkian Foundation. So the sophistication of these connections that for political reasons had to be done with as the Treaty of Rome was signed and as the community evolved, is still here with us, and it opens up as the difficult political situation that Europe is living unfolds. So what is the role of culture in allowing countries to own, not to forget their history, but at the same time being able to forget that moment of violence and moving on? So you basically need to articulate knowledge, the knowledge of that violent past, but the ability to create amnesty and move forward. The role of culture is not to create humanization. The fact that a society is highly educated and cultured does not preclude violence, and that is a terrible image of the orchestra of Auschwitz that tells you that the practice of culture and barbarism are not separate. Culture may be weaponized and a tool of ideological propaganda, but having said that, what does it do? Having in scope this notion of the long-term, low-intensity process of culture, it allows for anticipation and forewarning. It raises awareness, which is what we're doing here. It is what both high culture and popular culture do. It creates resilience, and whilst allowing communities to testify and witness. And it creates basically a willingness to survive and mend the future. And I'm going to just briefly show you two examples. one which many of you may know. And if I can, yes, the second link, please. It's the West Eastern Divan, an orchestra created by Edward Said and Daniel Barenboim, with Palestinian, Israeli, now also Syrian, Iranian artists, who to this day, and they are extremely involved in defending, I was looking even today, at Michael Barenboim, who now leads the Barenboim Said Academy in Berlin, very active in denouncing the actions in Gaza. It continues to be a space for dialogue and provide for a future. Below, okay, oh, we need to go down, scroll down, and then see the, yes, that's the video, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
It began as an experiment in listening to one another. It became a journey in finding equality through music. It is now a home for music, learning, and mutual respect. The West Eastern Divan Orchestra was established in Weimar in 1999 by the late Palestinian literary scholar Edward Said and renowned pianist and conductor Daniel Barenboim. The ensemble brings together young musicians from Israel, Palestine, and other countries in the Middle East, offering them a chance to listen to the narrative of the other and engage in transcultural dialogue by making music with each other. This dialogue comes alive in the orchestra's concerts. The United Nations named Daniel Barenboim Messenger of Peace in 2007 and recognized the West Eastern Divan as United Nations Global Advocate for Cultural Understanding in 2016, the first orchestra to receive this honor. A world-class ensemble, the Divan performs at prestigious venues like the BBC Proms, Carnegie Hall, the Lucerne and Salzburg festivals, and the Teatro Colón in Buenos Aires. Its concert in Ramallah in 2005 showed the world that the orchestra would not let itself be held back by political boundaries.
It is our belief that the destinies of these two people, of the Palestinian people and the Israeli people, are inextricably linked, and that it is our duty, all of us, to find a way to live together, because either we all kill each other or we learn to share what there is to share. It is with this message that we have come to you today.
And we will have to conclude very quickly.
So that's the second example about the resilience of culture. It's the story of Ernest Shackleton, 1914, Antarctica explorer. Their ship was stranded in Antarctica, ill-prepared. The dogs they had were not prepared for the environment. There's no way the ship could be taken out, and a party of men went out to look for a rescue. the rest stayed behind for 2 years while they waited to be rescued. And at one stage, the ship began to collapse. So it was necessary to take and put the goods that they had in the ship overboard. Well, they had instruments for research, for surveying in Antarctica. All of that went out. The only thing they kept, other than food, was banjos, music instruments, because they felt that to survive, it was the music that they needed, and not the scientific instruments. Nothing against science, but it is a very important testament to the role of culture in creating resilience.
Thank you so much to both of you. Rather than have questions from myself, which I do, I would, and given the time, I would like to open straight away questions to the audience. Do I see a hand up? Yes, back there, you're ahead. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for that. It's very much within my area of study, and I like the sensibility that you're looking at it as like we need to kind of like acknowledge the past, work on it in the present, and think about how this is going to be different in the future. And I think a lot of people just get stuck at talking about the past, but don't really think about like how this is going to impact our future and if we continue like handling this trend. So right now, with everything that is happening in the world and all the new wars and people talking about like, oh, we already started World War III and people don't know about it, and conspiracies, how do you see this unfolding within academia? What are the new topics that you think people are going to tackle? Are we going to talk about new types of damage? Are we going to talk about new therapies that we need in the future to handle these damage? Like, how do you foresee that, just out of curiosity? Like, as a scholar, how do you see that?
Thank you for the question.
So thank you very much for your question. Indeed, it is about future, our science. But I have to say that I only can speak from the perspective of cultural studies. I would like to invent some new therapeutic methods, but I can't. It's not my topic and it's not my field of research. But what I can do is to talk about culture and to not to stop, to present all the, well, there is no simple solution through culture. This is clear, and Isabel also stated the same thing. I think we will all agree about this. But it is necessary to continue our research because culture stages conflicts, for example, opens up fields for encounters, for jumping into fictional worlds to learn something about life worlds, experiences, people, cultures, positions, and so on that you would never have known if you hadn't read the novel, watched the film, and so on. So this is a space to create conflicts, but also to negotiate conflicts. This is a space where we will be able to think about how testifying works if the victims cannot speak anymore, of how to store or how to archive knowledge, which always is subjective experience that is not only the opposite of objective data or something like that. But, well, what comes into my mind was what Antonia Louise-Lee said yesterday in her talk. She said that the reason why she makes films is to humanize statistics, to humanize numbers, facts. And this is what culture can do. They can show us how Hayden White puts it, how it feels like to be exposed to political events, to be exposed to history. That's why we need culture.
I would add that we need to, and this is our role, all of us, to avoid tribalism. We need to create spaces like this where we engage with those who write, think, and defend views different than ours. It was Hannah Arendt who said that studying culture is about understanding that the other can also be right. And that means recognition. So if we use our role as, and it is a position of privilege, ours and yours, we can be heard, right? There are many who cannot. Those who are being bombed right now and who are just on the receiving end, we want to have their voices, but perhaps we can speak for them. And I know that this is a position, I'm not arguing with Gayatri Spivak to speak for the subaltern, which is not, absolutely, that is not the position. But we are in a position where we can be heard. And that means that we need to create strategies of recognition. And that's why I think the example of Barenboim and Said was very courageous at the time when they created that. It's still courageous today. We cannot lose hope. And it's not simply important to read those who think like us, because otherwise we'll be in our tribes, in our social networks, tribes, in the tribes of those who read our theory. But we need to engage. We need to engage, and I think that's the role of culture. That's the role of the humanities. That's the role of philosophy. That's why in authoritarian states the humanities are being limited. Okay, for instance, the study of the liberal arts is being limited in China as we speak, and so I think this is where we need to go.
Thank you both. We have a question.
Yes, thank you very much for this thought-provoking exchange. I have a question which is very concrete and historical. When is the concept of reparation born? It sounds to me like a very modern construct, because in the concept of reparation, there is the sense that someone else has to repair to what happened to someone else. So there is a duality that does not have to do with this sense of individual trauma in which one individual needs to overcome. An individual or a society, no? As societies, we know that with like same thing with individuals, trauma transforms identity. You become someone else. I'm less Freudian than Proustian. I think time gone by cannot be recovered. It is very much like the Barenboim example shows, a matter of finding a way of going forward with a new identity that includes what has happened. No, that's what happens. But in the concept of reparation, there's this sense that someone makes amends for something. There's accountability involved. So I wonder when, because obviously the Romans, Alexander, all of these people never thought about reparation. You went ahead and eliminated.
I don't know the answer. I just know that we moved from reconciliation, for instance, South Africa, the commissions of reconciliation, to a discussion on reparations. So maybe Christiane.
Well, indeed, there has been a concept of reparation in antiquity, but it was very different from that what we are talking about today. That means that the party who lost the war had to repair. They had to repair. They had to compensate. When this idea of financial reparation, of legal reparation, was something that started, I would say, after the First World War with the Treaty of Versailles. But this idea of repairing trauma is something very new. It is, even Freud didn't say a lot about this, and it was for a long time, for decades after the Second World War, it was contested that nightmares, for example, had something to do with the Holocaust. They said, well, it was an evil childhood and so on. So it was the returns from the the veterans from the Vietnam War that led to all this trauma therapy and the recognition of trauma, nightmare, and the recognition of an illness, of a pathological dimension. So this is something very new, but the concept of cultural reparation is even, the South Africa, this reconciliation work is very important, but then in the field of cultural studies, I would say that that comes up in the 21st century with all those crises that we have now, where we see very clearly that that legal, political, financial, material reparation is essential, is indispensable. It is. Of course, we have to restore sort of equality to negotiate something. So I never would argue against it, but it's not enough. And we see that it is not enough. We see in Russia that it's not enough. We see in Gaza that it is not enough. There has to be symbolic reparation, and this has to respond to offenses, to humiliation, to discrimination, and it has to work to restore dignity and recognition.
Thank you. Question back there.
Hello. I'm a master's student, so maybe I'm not able to really say what I want to say without getting misunderstood, but I feel a bit insecure, sorry. What I wanted to ask is to get back about the idea of the dialogue you were mentioning before the question, because it's a bit of a conflicting feeling for me. For example, in the video you just saw, probably half of the Palestinian people that were playing in that orchestra don't have a home anymore to get back to. And the thing is that I agree that culture should be a place for dialogue and dialogue with somebody that doesn't think the same way as you do. But especially after the extreme right race we've seen right now in the European elections, and especially in the case of Palestine and Israel, Israel has had the power of the narrative of the conflict for so long that it's made the Palestinian case completely invisible. So where is the line between letting these people talk, because I don't believe that fascist thinking should be something we should hear, and I think that is one of the problems that it just happened in Europe right now. We are listening to the narratives that extreme right parties are throwing there, using methods as fear or really emotional calling, and using immigration as a tool to change people's minds with lies. So my question is like, isn't it dangerous? Like, I understand that we need to dialogue with everybody, but with everybody? Because this is what is happening right now. I'm really sorry. I know it's a bit extreme of idea, but this is how Israel lasted for more than 50 years occupying Palestine, because we never listened to the Palestinians. The only ones that had the voice was Israel.
So imagine we wouldn't let the master students talk. Sorry, do you want to... Did you finish?
That's a very important question, because that is the question. No matter how uneven, because it's a question of a total unevenness of power. Let me put it this way. If you don't engage in dialogue, there is only one way out. You eradicate the other, and you become like that other. Yes. You know, I will always fight for anyone to disagree with me completely. That's my position. That's the cultural position. It's a very hard position to take, because you're basically arguing with people who want to annihilate you. I mean, not you. Okay, but
we're all for master students, eh? Had a final question somewhere in the suddenly. Yes. Sorry.
Yes, thank you. I was not going to step in, but the question that Antonio Monegal put forward is a very interesting one on the compensation historical origin, or the basic argument on history for that. I think we have to separate reparation and compensation, because reparation is a very old word. If you go back to the ancient people, they reparated each other or repaired each other by sort of enslaving each other. But what contemporary history signs up with the word reparation is a sort of a moral reconciliation. And I think a pivotal moment for that was the post-World War II environment. Think about the very idea of never again, or the German Stunde Null, and even the type of justice applied in Nuremberg or by the United States against their staunch enemy, Japan. A sort of reparational justice, not to see the other as an ongoing enemy, but to make amends. And this was translated into laws, into economic programs, into even weapon exchange. And if you come to think about a very interesting book, which totally copes with this theme, which is Frank Furedi's World War I, Still No End in Sight. Still no end 100 years after that. And something that Frank Furedi stresses is the symbolic character of just two pictures. There is a handshake between Chancellor Adenauer and Robert Schuman in 1951, and then reenacted by Mitterrand and Kohl at the Verdun battlefield in 1984. Just two pictures, but that's the whole meaning of the true reparation, not just financial compensation, not just territorial exchanges, but a true reparation.
We've had questions from the middle, right? I would like to go to the left. And then I'll go back to you, and we have to close, sorry.
Hi, thank you so much. I think it's been an interesting talk and debate so far. A bit of time ago, I came across this concept of ethical loneliness, which is, I mean, it's the name of a book, but it's kind of the idea of the oppressed being left alone by humanity and the feeling that that creates. And I think it plays a big role in the way we deal with trauma on a big scale. And I think it's also the reason why there is a lot of kind of collective shame on the other side, so from the oppressor side, also when a conflict is over or when it's not. So I want to kind of ask, how can we cope with this kind of conflicting situation that happens?
Well, I have never come across that notion, but it seems ethical loneliness. I can fully relate to that and understand. How do you deal with the ethical loneliness of the oppressed, right? How do you... I think the one thing that anyone can do is to be aware and find strategies to support those who are in that situation so that they won't continue to be lonely in that way. I'll give you a practical example. I think it's always a good instance. At the university, we've just been, we were contacted by the University of Bethlehem, who is in a very, very complicated situation. And to support the university, they can't operate right now in Bethlehem. They're trying to diverge activities to East Jerusalem. The fact of the matter is that the students cannot travel from Bethlehem to East Jerusalem. And they asked for our support. What can we do? We cannot travel to Bethlehem. We can travel to East Jerusalem, but there are ways in which we can support. We can allow the students to participate, integrate our seminars. We can transform what we do online, give them access for free. We can allow our faculty to participate, teach, work collaboratively with local faculty. I think we need to analyze each of our position. We're all different, but we all have even small things, routine things that we can do. To be aware of precisely that situation of being alone, of feeling decoupled from the world, and do what we can in our context. You saw that in Transform for Europe, one of our members is the University of Mariupol in the Ukraine. And, well, Mariupol is occupied right now. Well, we continue to support our colleagues in the Ukraine and their faculty.
Just a very small comment also to add. If there is ethical loneliness, I would say that there are not enough institutions and not enough structures and not enough spaces where they can be heard and where they are not alone, where they can connect. So this is a responsibility we have to create spaces of encounter. And this is also what Transform for Europe does. I think it is important to state that some decades before it was not possible. Collaboration between France and Germany. There had been dictatorship in Germany, there had been dictatorship in Portugal, in Spain. It was unimaginable that with Lithuania, with Estonia, with Slovenia, with Poland, we can collaborate, we can create spaces for exchange, spaces for encounter, spaces where we learn from each other, spaces where we see that we come from very different cultures, also scientific cultures, cultures of research, cultures of teaching, cultures of everything. And we can create a space where we can agree to disagree. But just to add this, I am convinced that every single individual has to start with one's own to take responsibility either for the victims or as a perpetrator or as a person who comes from a nation of former perpetrators. You quoted, Isabel, you referred to Zygmunt Bauman, and he is somebody who in his book on Holocaust says that the most threatening or the most frightening thing about the Holocaust is that it is not a phenomenon where we see that this can happen again, but that we could have done it. So I would say this is the point where we all have to start and we have to take responsibility for. Thank you.
Thank you. One final question, so we close.
Well, in a way, when I asked for the microphone, I was thinking exactly about what is the role of the universities in this context that we've been discussing here. And somehow, the moment that I thought about the question, then you answered my question. But maybe another minute or two to elaborate a little bit more on the role of universities in this for this context.
Yeah, I'll join that with my final question, which was indeed what can these alliances and T4EU do for this, I would call it healing, reparation process through culture.
I'll start with the alliances and what we can do and what universities can do. Let us be reminded that universities were at the forefront of all transformations for freedom and democracy in the world. Now, you can also say that under authoritarian regimes, they were used. And we still have that. But we have this is the minority report as that forfeits what the mission of the university is in abstract terms, which is basically to contribute to create individuals that through knowledge can make reasoned choices to advance their lives and that of the societies they're in. If we unpack this grand narrative into the different disciplines, and if you look at our field in the humanities are absolutely critical in raising awareness, understanding the past in order to be able to analyze our current condition and be hopeful for the future. We live at a time when being pessimistic is irresponsible. If you think that the future is bleak, that you have to accept authoritarianism, that you have to accept the status quo of what is wrong, that is being irresponsible. And no one will do that for you. I mean, institutions, we are here, and especially those who are leading institutions, have that responsibility to move the community, but it starts with every one of us. And so I think this is what universities, this is what they are. We are not simply, there was ancient former president of the University of Chicago that said, well, universities, it's just a bunch of infrastructure managed by someone who sits in a corporate office. No, that's a terrible technical image of what a university is. No, a university is a community of scholars and students. Where I would say it's a community of people who are learning together. This is what we're doing here. If we let go of that principle, and that is a free principle. No one is forcing you to be here. No one is forcing us to be here. We're in total freedom. And our mission is to create precisely those spaces where diverging visions can be brought together, engage in a dialogue, and allow us to accept the responsibility for the societies we live in and for the future we want.
Thank you. Do you want to comment?
Well, what can universities do? I would say we can, in the humanities, create projects that do research exactly on this problematic to advance in this field where a lot of research has to be done. So I created a research center on cultural practices of reparation, and the idea is not only to bring together fellows of the entire world with very different positions and to create a space where there is enough freedom to be in conflict and to agree to disagree, but also where we think about, well, establishing a new theory on reparation, and where our ideas of collaboration are in themselves, reparative ways of engaging. So where we bear that the other has another opinion, that we don't agree, for example. We have scholars from Namibia, from, well, the next round from Iraq, from Israel. I know that it is conflictual, but that is what we have to manage and where we have to navigate through. So this is important for me.
Thank you so much. I would just close the session. We're being pressured. Just to say a couple of notes. What I take from this Science Café is indeed, well, it's probably just one at the end of the day. It's the responsibility for us to continue creating spaces where we can disagree with freedom, as you both said. It is up to us. There's no lack of conflicts for us to deal with, for sure. I don't think that, unfortunately, we'll end that quickly. But it's up to us. It's not up to the guys sitting somewhere. It's up to us. So, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure to see that no one has actually left. Instead, someone came in, which is fantastic. Thank you so much for this time, and thank you for the Swiss speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dit